Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to admit, today's stack of documents, it really sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we usually come into these topics thinking we know the landscape,
Mhm.
especially with something like biblical theology. But this material we have today, it's from NB Ministries about a group called Nations of Faith, and it just completely flips the script.
It does. It forces a real perspective shift. I mean, usually when people talk about faith or salvation, the focus is incredibly narrow. It's all about me,
Exactly. My soul, my choices.
my personal journey. Yeah.
It's that me and my personal savior lens. But the first thing that jumped out at me from these notes, and I actually had to double check this because it sounded so high, was a statistic.
What about the word nations?
Yes. The frequency is it's surprising, isn't it?
It really is.
It's huge. The text says the word nations appears in the Bible over 500 times. 500! I mean, if I saw a word 500 times in a novel, I would assume that's the main theme.
Yeah.
So why do we miss that? Is it just, are we conditioned to only read for the individual stories?
I think that's exactly it. We read with these sort of individualistic glasses on. So we see Abraham as a man, David as a king,
Peter as a disciple.
Peter as a disciple. But the argument this text makes, and it's a compelling one, is that the biblical narrative isn't actually about individuals. Or, well, not just about individuals. It's about collective identities.
So the camera is zoomed way, way out.
Exactly. It's a macro view.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to look at today, this whole macro framework, how nations fit into a divine plan, how they supposedly broke their original deal.
And the very specific, almost diplomatic way this ministry believes they can be brought back into alignment.
And we're not just talking abstract theology here. We've got the actual origin story of the Nations of Faith group itself. It's a fascinating case study.
It is. It starts with this one guy just burning out, trying to help people one by one, and then realizing, wait, I need to treat the whole nation.
It's a shift from, retail ministry
To what? Wholesale.
to wholesale ministry, essentially.
Yeah, I love that. Wholesale ministry. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. The documents argue this whole idea of nations having a relationship with God isn't some new thing. They trace it all the way back to Genesis.
Yeah, the Abrahamic covenant. This is the bedrock of their entire argument. They point right to Genesis 17, verse 4.
Which is that classic name change moment.
Yeah.
Abram becomes Abraham. Now, I've heard this preached 1,000 times as, a personal promotion. He was a great guy, so he gets a better title.
That's the standard reading. But if you look closer at the text they provide, it points out the meaning. Abram means exalted father.
Which is nice, but personal.
Right. But Abraham means father of a multitude.
So it's a shift in scale.
It's a shift in function. The text argues this wasn't a reward, it was an assignment, a geopolitical assignment. And they quote Genesis 22:18.
Through your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed.
All the nations.
Not just a lot of people.
Precisely. That distinction is so crucial. If you see Abraham as just the patriarch of a family line, you're missing the point. The source material calls him the father of many nations.
Okay.
So he's positioned as the anchor point for a global restoration. The idea is that God wasn't just trying to save a lineage. He was trying to align the blessing of every nation on earth through this one figure.
Okay, so plan A then was for nations to be in this covenant relationship. But I mean, obviously looking at history
Sure.
and the world today, that didn't go according to plan. The documents talk about a break.
A divergence. And this is where the theology gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit tragic. The text introduces this concept of an assignment as nations.
Right.
The argument is that nations originally had this covenant, or at least access to it, but they came out of the covenant.
Came out of the covenant. That sounds like they just opted out of a treaty or something.
That's a really good analogy. And the text is very specific about how they did this. It wasn't just general bad behavior. It was a specific type of spiritual treason.
I saw that part. It mentions choosing strange gods. And it gets so granular. It specifically lists the sun and the moon.
Yes, we are coming from nations that for a time have chosen the sun as a god or the moon as a deity.
Why those two specifically? Is it just ancient paganism?
I think it's symbolic of a bigger shift. I mean,
Yeah.
the sun and moon are the most obvious, powerful, created things we can see, right?
Wow.
By worshiping them, a nation shifts its allegiance from the creator to the created. It's a fundamental misaligning of the hierarchy. And the text lists the consequences of this opt-out.
It's a bleak list.
Yeah.
Slavery, loss of privilege, rebellion.
It paints this picture of nations effectively losing their way. They lose their inheritance. That's a word that comes up a lot. And they fall into chaos.
Mm-hmm.
This creates a split.
Right. On one side, you have Israel, and on the other, the Gentiles.
Hmm.
Now, usually when I hear Gentile, I just think non-Jewish. It's a demographic category. But in this text, it feels like it carries a much heavier charge.
It does. In this framework, Gentile isn't just an ethnicity. It's a political status relative to God.
Mhm.
It implies the nations that are hostile or separated or just outside that original covenant.
Versus Israel. And I have to mention the definition the text gives for Israel. It doesn't just say the land. It defines Israel as God contended or triumphant with God.
A people chosen and set apart. So you get this dichotomy. You have one group that kept the connection, and then the vast majority of nations that drifted off, worshiping the creation, the sun, the moon, whatever, and suffering the consequences.
So if the break was nations walking away, then the rest of the text seems to be about the strategy to get them back, the path of return.
Exactly.
And it frames the entire history from King David to Jesus, not just as religious history, but as a retrieval mission.
A retrieval mission is a perfect way to put it. It's active. The text quotes Psalm 2, verse 8, which is a favorite in these circles. Ask of me, and I will assuredly give you the nations as your inheritance.
See, there's that word inheritance again. It sounds like a land deed. Like the nations are property that's been lost in some kind of legal dispute.
That is the theological framework they are operating in. The nations belong to God by right. They were lost through rebellion, and they need to be legally reclaimed. And this is where they position Jesus.
Right. They cite John 12.32, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself.
But the image that really struck me, and I know we talked about this before we started recording, is from Isaiah 5.26.
The whistling.
The whistling. He lives a flag for the distant nations and whistles for them from the ends of the earth.
I just want to pause on that image because it's so unusual. We usually think of God, thundering or commanding or sending armies, but whistling.
Well, think about when you whistle. You whistle for a dog, maybe to hail a taxi. It implies this: effortless authority. You don't have to scream. You just give a signal, and the response is expected.
It's intimate but commanding at the same time. And the text follows it up by saying, indeed, they will come with great speed swiftly.
The speed is key. It's not this reluctant drag. It's a rush. The text pairs this with Isaiah 2.2, talking about nations streaming to the mountain of the Lord.
Streaming, that usually implies water flowing downhill, right? But here, they're streaming up a mountain. It's a supernatural movement.
It suggests that once the signal is given, once that whistle is heard, the natural state of nations is to return. They want to go back to that original alignment.
So that's the high-level theology, the theory of everything, so to speak. But what I find so compelling about these documents is that they're not written by a theologian in an ivory tower. They are the internal docs of a working ministry. They are trying to actually do this.
And that transition from theory to practice is where it gets messy, which brings us to the origin story of Nations of Faith.
Which started with a much more intense name, the Forum of Deliverance.
Right. And for listeners who might not be familiar, deliverance in this context is a very specific, intense type of prayer. It's about spiritual cleanup, breaking habits, addressing spiritual oppression. It's heavy lifting.
It's like the spiritual emergency room.
That's it, exactly. And the founder, who writes in the first person in these notes, was running this forum. They were praying for people from all over the world. But there's a huge problem.
The follow-up.
It was impossible. The text says time was never enough to assist anyone. They do this intense work, the person would fly back to their home country, and without support, they'd often struggle. The founder was clearly burning out.
It's the classic bottleneck. One person, a small team, trying to fix a global problem one individual at a time. It just doesn't scale.
And that's when the pivot happens. And true to the nature of this material, it happens through a dream.
This is the turning point in the whole narrative. The founder describes a dream of seeing people sitting in huge tents.
Huge tents, not houses, not churches. Tents imply a gathering, maybe a temporary one, or nomadic like Abraham's.
And the founder walks up to these tents and recognizes the faces. These are the same people from the forum, but the dynamic has changed. In the dream, the founder asks, "Who are you?"
And a lady answers, speaking for the whole group, "We are the nations of faith."
We are the nations of faith. That is such a distinct identity shift. They're not people who need help anymore.
No, they've gone from being patients in a hospital to being ambassadors. The founder wakes up, and the instruction is crystal clear. Change the name of the forums to Nations of Faith.
It shifts the burden, doesn't it? Instead of the founder carrying the weight of all these individuals, the individuals are now carrying the weight of their nations.
And if you look at the list of member nations in the document, That shift allowed them to scale massively. We are not talking about a local prayer group anymore.
No, I was looking at this list and I was going to read it, but it's actually too long. It's genuinely global. You've got a heavy footprint in Europe, France, Germany, the UK. But what really stood out to me was the African representation.
It is extensive. Francophone Africa is huge here. Gabon, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Benin, Togo, and also Anglophone nations like Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria.
And then it expands out into Asia and the Caribbean, India, Korea, Jamaica. It's a United Nations of prayer, essentially.
And the text notes, they meet for hours on the Sabbath. This is not a 15-minute devotional. This is a diplomatic summit, spiritually speaking.
So let's talk about what happens in that summit, because the document gives us their playbook. They don't just sit around and chat, they engage in intercession.
Right. And to define that term again, intercession is like having legal standing. It's going before a judge on behalf of someone else. They are pleading the case of their nations.
And they use the Psalms as their legal arguments. I found this fascinating. They treat the Psalms almost like codified law.
It's a very liturgical approach. They map specific psalms to specific national needs.
Let's break a few of these down because the choices tell us a lot about what they value. They start with sovereignty, using Psalm 113.4.
The Lord is high above all nations. This is the foundational claim. Before you ask for anything, you have to establish who's in charge.
Okay.
So the prayer here acknowledges that despite different creeds or ethnicities or political parties, there is a supreme authority over the nation.
It's a reality check. It puts the earthly government in perspective. But then they move to something that feels incredibly relevant right now. Unity, using Psalm 133.
How good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity.
And it uses that famous imagery, the precious oil running down Aaron's beard and the dew of Hermon.
Which is beautiful poetry, but let's unpack what it means here. Oil and dew represent blessing, freshness, anointing. But the prayer specifically asks for this unity to wash away bitterness.
That phrase really stuck with me, wash away bitterness, because if you look at any nation on that list, or our own bitterness is the defining flavor of modern politics.
It is. Historical grievances, class divides, racial tensions. Bitterness is the poison in the national groundwater. They are praying for a supernatural unity that acts as a solvent for that bitterness.
It's not just let's all get along, it's more like heal the wound that makes us hate each other.
Exactly. And that leads directly into their prayer for justice. Psalm 146.
This is the social justice piece?
It is. The text quotes the psalm about upholding the cause of the oppressed, giving food to the hungry, and setting prisoners free.
It's interesting because sometimes spiritual groups get criticized for only caring about heaven and ignoring earth. But this prayer is very earthy. It's about food, prisoners, the oppressed.
It shows that their view of a nation of faith includes structural integrity. You can't have a holy nation with an unholy justice system. They're praying for the society itself to function justly.
And finally, they pray for freedom. They quote John 8:36, "If the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed."
But look at the application. They connect it to Revelation 5.9, which speaks of people from every tribe and tongue. And they pray specifically for freedom from bigotry and hatred.
Deliver us from the bigotry and hatred that divide us.
Which circles right back to that Gentile versus Israel idea, but in this redemptive way. Instead of the nations being hostile, they're praying for a kingdom reality where distinctness, tribes, language is preserved, but the hostility is gone.
It's the anti-Babel.
That is a perfect description. At Babel, nations were scattered and confused. Here, they're distinct but united in purpose. The text even mentions they're actively praying for more nations to join us. They see this as an expanding circle of light.
You know, what I find most striking about this whole stack of documents is the intentionality. It's so easy to be cynical about the state of the world. We look at the news, we see the wars, the corruption, the bitterness, as they call it.
And we feel helpless.
Right. Most of us just tune out or you doom scroll. But this group looks at the same map, sees the same chaos, and says, no, this is a spiritual problem with a spiritual solution. They're taking these ancient text poems written thousands of years ago and treating them like a blueprint for modern nation building.
It's applied theology in its most ambitious form. The core belief is that a nation has a personality, a destiny, an inheritance, and that it can be lost or found.
It challenges the way we think about citizenship. We usually think of it in terms of rights, what can my country do for me? Or maybe duties, taxes, voting. But this text suggests a kind of spiritual citizenship. It asks, What is my country's relationship with the divine?
And maybe more importantly, what is my role in repairing that relationship? It turns the believer into a diplomat.
Which brings us to a pretty heavy question for you, the listener. We've been talking about assignments and inheritances for a while now. The source text suggests that no nation is an accident, that every group of people has a specific role to play in this macro plan.
It implies your location isn't random.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with. If this Nations of Faith text is right, and nations have a spiritual assignment or inheritance to fulfill, what would that look like for your own country today?
That's a big question.
If you had to write the spiritual job description for your nation, not its GDP goals, not its military strategy, but its spiritual assignment, what would it say? And are you helping it get there?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into the Nations of Faith. We'll catch you next time.